The radio came on at 1:20 in the morning, and Andromeda heard it from across the hall. She had not been asleep. She had stopped pretending around midnight when the sound started filtering in. Distant pops of apparition in the neighboring streets, something wrong in the air, Ted's breathing shifting from the deep, steady rhythm of sleep into something held and careful. He was awake too. Neither of them said so. The radio announcer's voice was trembling. She heard Voldemort first, not you, no, who, not he, who, must, not be named, but Voldemort, the name used now with the breathless disbelief of someone announcing an event they cannot make themselves believe. Gone, the announcer was saying. Something had happened at Godric's Hollow, and no one was certain of the particulars, but the result was gone. Andromeda sat up in the dark. She listened. James and Lily Potter dead. The infant survived. Sirius Black arrested at the scene. 12 muggles dead in the street, and Peter Pettigrew, that one took a moment, and then the count. 13 dead, all attributed to Sirius Black in ministry custody. The infant had survived with a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. Harry, she thought. James and Lily's Harry. Ted had come to the doorway. He was standing with his hands in the pockets of his dressing gown, looking at her with the expression he kept for moments when he already knew what she was thinking and had decided to wait while she arrived there herself. His face was pale in the thin light from the hallway. He had been listening too. Then of course he had. Sirius is in custody, Andromeda said. Yes, without trial. Pass. The radio had said it in the tone of an aside, detained without formal process while the ministry assessed the scene. They'll do everything without trial in these first few days. The whole country is in pieces, and everyone who matters is too relieved to worry about due process. Ted said nothing. Andromeda sat in the dark and did the mathematics. The Blacks were a family you could understand as a ledger. She had spent her entire adult life undrawing herself from that ledger, crossing out the Black name wherever it appeared beside her own, building a household from scratch in a neighborhood where no one knew that her parents had removed her from the family tapestry with a hot iron. But a ledger, once you understood how to read it, remained legible from a distance. She had not loved being a Black, but she had been one long enough to know exactly what the ledger said tonight. Orion Black, dead since 1979. She had felt that one at a remove, the way you feel the loss of something you had already let go. Regulus. Dead a few months later, and she did not know what his end had looked like, only that it had come for him in the dark somewhere, and he had not come back from it. Bellatrix was free for now. There was a particular coldness to considering this. Her older sister, somewhere out in the night, that had just erupted in celebration. The war that Bellatrix had fought on the losing side, now finished. She would be arrested within days. Bellatrix was not a person who disappeared quietly, and she was not a person who would allow herself to be taken peacefully. And Azkaban was not the same as present and functional. Bellatrix was for every practical purpose gone. Narcissa was alive and free, married to Lucius Malfoy, and therefore entangled in Death Eater politics as thoroughly as a person could be, while still maintaining the appearance of a respectable home. Narcissa would not take a half-blood child under any circumstances she could construct in her mind. Not this child, not with this visibility, which left Walburga. Andromeda did not spend long on Walburga. The woman was alive. She had outlasted everyone's expectations on spite alone, and she was living in Grimmauld Place, and she would never allow a half-blood child through that door. The specific texture of Walburga Black's hatreds was something Andromeda understood with a precision she had spent 20 years trying to forget. She had been measured against those standards for the first 18 years of her life, and found wanting, and Harry Potter would find exactly the same verdict waiting for him if that door ever opened. She was the only black who was both free and willing. She understood this the way you understood an equation when the last variable resolved, not with feeling attached to it, not yet, but with the flat clarity of something that had stopped being a question and become a fact. "I'm going to go," she said. Ted crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. He did not say, "Don't," and he did not say, "Are you certain?" and he did not say, "Think carefully about what this will cost us," because he knew all of those things were true, and he also knew she had already thought them, and that none of them had changed anything. "I'll clear out the spare room," he said. She looked at him. Ted's face in the dark was familiar in the way of a face you chose when you were old enough to understand that choosing was something you were allowed to do. He was not afraid. He was a man who responded to impossible things by identifying what needed to be moved, to make space for them, and this, she thought, was one of the reasons she had chosen him. "Nymphadora's asleep," Andromeda said. "She'll be ecstatic in the morning." She nearly laughed. She put her hand on his arm for a moment briefly, and then she got up. She reached Dumbledore through wizarding channels. The streets were fractured that night, busy with light and running feet, and voices raised in something between terror and euphoria, and she moved through it, with the focused calm of a woman who has made a decision and is not interested in obstacles. She found him before he reached the Dursley doorstep. She was not entirely certain afterward how she had managed it so quickly. She did not stop to examine the question. He was taller than she had expected. She had never spoken to him directly. He turned when he heard her coming, and his expression, which she had expected to be imperious, the headmaster's measured authority, was something else entirely, cracked, something old and complicated and caught off guard, which was not an expression she had thought Albus Dumbledore capable of producing. She stated her claim. She kept it brief and exact, because she suspected he would be looking for a weakness in the reasoning, rather than listening for the feeling underneath it. She was a black by blood. No tapestry could revoke blood. A family might choose to pretend otherwise, and the Black family had, and she had spent 20 years watching the pretense hold in every social register. Here she stood in the cold of a November street, as proof that her lineage remained real and intact, regardless of what her mother had done with a hot iron. Sirius Black had been Harry Potter's named godfather. Sirius Black was now in ministry custody and would be transferred to Azkaban without trial, which meant he was in no position to exercise that role and would not be for years at minimum. She was the senior-most available Black, who was free and capable and willing. She was here. Dumbledore listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at her, and what she saw in his face was fear, not of her, not of her claim, but of something she was preventing without knowing she was doing it. She noted this and filed it carefully. She had learned over the years that Dumbledore kept his knowledge in careful order and released it in the sequence that served his purposes, and she was not naive enough to believe she was exempt from that practice. She would learn what it meant later. What mattered tonight was that he had no legal mechanism to refuse her, and she could see in his expression the precise moment when he understood that. Hagrid came around from somewhere behind him, enormous and red-eyed with grief, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows he is carrying something he must not drop. The infant was held against his chest in both arms. Behind him, at the curb, there was a flying motorcycle of the kind that could only have belonged to Sirius. The child was very small. Andromeda took him, and the infant looked up at her with large green eyes, and on his forehead there was a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt, still fresh at the edges, still a little angry. His hair was all directions at once, thick and black. He was entirely calm in the way of a baby who has been handed between so many arms in one night that calm is all he has left. He looked at her. He did not cry. She looked at his face, and she did not name what she felt. She carried him away from the street, and Dumbledore's watching eyes, and the cold, and the night closed in around them both. All right, she thought. Then, all right. Andromeda had not slept. She had sat in the chair Ted moved into the spare room, deep and worn, and angled wrong for sitting upright, and held Harry through what remained of the night. He slept with the total commitment of infancy, one fist pressed against his cheek, his breathing steady and oblivious. The scar on his forehead caught the lamplight every time she shifted. She looked at it. She looked away. She looked at it again. By the time the sky outside went from black to grey to the thin, colourless light of a November dawn, Ted had transformed the spare room from a storage problem into something that resembled a place a child could live. She had not asked him to. He had simply moved through the house in the small hours with the quiet focus of a man who expressed love through function. And when she looked up from the chair he had found, from somewhere, a blanket and a drawer deep enough to serve as a crib, and the room smelled of cedar from the wardrobe he had shoved to one wall to make space. She watched him carry in a second blanket and thought, this is what it looks like when someone is with you. Then Nymphadora woke up. They heard her coming down the hallway, 8 years old, and still entirely unfamiliar with the concept of a quiet approach. And there was a pause outside the door, and the door opened 3 careful inches, and one eye appeared in the gap. Brown, wide, belonging to a child whose hair had been mousy brown when she went to bed, and was now, involuntarily, the startled pink of someone who has encountered something they were not prepared for. She had not done that on purpose. She never did when something surprised her badly enough. "Is that a baby?" Nymphadora said. "It is," Ted said from the corner. "Why do we have a baby?" Andromeda looked at her daughter across the top of Harry's sleeping head. "Come in," she said quietly. Nymphadora came in, not quietly, and stood at a careful distance from the chair. She studied the infant with the focused suspicion of a child who has not yet decided whether this development is good news or very bad news. Her hair shifted from pink to a tentative, wondering yellow. She had not done that on purpose either. "He's very small," she said. "He is. What's his name? Harry. Is he going to stay?" "Yes," Andromeda said. "He's going to stay." Nymphadora reached out one careful finger and touched the back of Harry's fist. He stirred without waking, made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a protest, and closed all 4 fingers around hers with the blind. Total grip of it, Nymphadora's hair went gold. Andromeda had expected him sooner. She had spent most of the morning half anticipating a knock which had done nothing for her ability to eat breakfast or answer Nymphadora's 17 questions about Harry's scar, all of which she seemed prepared to ask in unbroken sequence. She had reached question 12 when the sound came, and she had sat very still for a moment, and then she had handed Harry to Ted and gone to the sitting room. He filled the doorway in a way that had nothing to do with his height, though he was very tall, and the silver beard and the half-moon spectacles perched at the end of an aquiline nose, and the particular quality of his attention. She had met powerful wizards before. She had grown up in a house full of people who confused cruelty with strength. And Dumbledore was nothing like them. He was something more uncomfortable than that, genuinely formidable. "Mrs. Tonks," he said. "Professor Dumbledore, She did not offer tea. She sat and he sat across from her, and she waited. He explained the bond of blood. He did it carefully, the way you explain something to a person you respect but cannot persuade. Lily Potter's death had created a sacrificial protection, ancient magic, older than most of what they taught at Hogwarts, rooted in the principle that a loving sacrifice made for another person left a trace of that love in the blood of the survivor. That protection lived in Harry. It would, given the right conditions, extend outward and become a seal. The conditions were precise. A blood relative of Lily's had to choose to take Harry in. Not any relative. The magic required Lily's blood specifically, the biological thread that ran between Lily and her only surviving family. The charm would bind itself into a home, into the specific walls of the specific house where the relative lived, and it would make that house unreachable to any creature acting in Voldemort's service or his name. The relative in question, Dumbledore said, is Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, née Evans. She is a Muggle. She lives at 4 Privet Drive, Ive, in Little Winging, Surrey. Had Harry spent last night there, Andromeda said, the seal would have been placed. Yes, but he did not spend the night there. No. A pause that had weight in it. He did not. Can the charm be placed retroactively? If Harry were taken to Privet Drive, now, today, tomorrow, would that be sufficient? Dumbledore looked at her steadily. The charm required a first act of choosing, a genuine taking in, freely given, before any competing claim was established. Once that act has been supplanted by another, the window closes. You let this settle. You are not Lily's relative. The magic does not recognize you in that way, and there is nothing I can do to change what the magic requires. Andromeda sat with this. Then, what can reach Harry now that the seal would have stopped? Anyone acting in Voldemort's name, Dumbledore said. Death Eaters with loyalty to him, creatures that have pledged to his service, and Voldemort himself. He said the name with the steadiness of someone who has been saying it while others refuse to. I want to be entirely clear about this. He is not dead. Vaporized is the word being used, and it is imprecise, but not entirely inaccurate. He exists, something, a wraith, barely a presence, somewhere. He will not be a threat for some years. But he is not gone, and when he finds a way to reconstitute himself, or finds a host willing enough, or finds another path back, and he will, this child will be findable. This house has no seal. No creature loyal to Voldemort will be turned away from your door by any protection I can name. She looked at him. If Harry had been at Privet Drive, she said, and a Death Eater, acting not at Voldemort's direct instruction but on their own, chose to move against him there. Out of old loyalty, out of hatred, out of the particular kind of person who keeps fighting a war that's been declared over, would the seal have stopped them? Dumbledore considered this with the honesty she had expected and was almost grateful for. The charm would have stopped anything acting in Voldemort's name or his interest, he said. A wizard acting entirely on private motivation, with no connection to Voldemort at all. He paused. The charm has limits. A Muggle weapon would have passed through unimpeded. Then what you are describing, Andromeda said, is certainty for a specific category of threat, not absolute safety. Certainty that the most significant category is addressed. She watched him. I understand why that category is the one that matters most to you. It is the one you can address with a charm. I am not certain that is the same as the one that will actually come for him. Dumbledore said, it is the one most likely to come for him. then I will find other ways to address the others." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression, not defeat, not quite, the look of a man who has identified the precise shape of an argument he cannot win by force, and is deciding whether to try another approach. He appeared to conclude that he would not. "I cannot compel you," he said. "No," Andromeda said. "You cannot." He rose. He retrieved his cloak from the arm of the chair. He moved toward the door, and he paused before it, with his hand not quite on the handle. "Mrs. Tonks." He turned to look at her over his shoulder. "Voldemort will return. I do not know when. It may be years, it may be longer, but he is not gone, and he marked that child, and when he returns the danger will be of a kind that I am not certain any household ward can fully address." He said it without drama and without performance, in the even voice of someone naming a fact that hurts no less for being stated plainly. "I tell you this not to frighten you. I tell you because you chose this, and you deserve to carry it knowing its full weight." Andromeda said nothing for a moment. "Then we had better be ready," she said. He left. She sat in the still sitting room and listened to the house around her. Ted in the kitchen, the small sounds of Nymphadora, asking Harry a question he could not yet answer, the kettle beginning its low complaint. Through the window, the November afternoon was grey and entirely ordinary. Anyone walking past on the pavement outside would have seen nothing worth noticing. A terraced house, a lit window, the ordinary signs of a household in the middle of a Saturday, no sealed door, no ancient magic, no protection that bore Lily Potter's name, only a woman sitting in a sitting room calculating, in very great detail, exactly what she intended to do instead. The first thing Harry learned to do with any competence was make lamps burst. He was 14 months old when it started, sitting on the floor of the sitting room, stacking and unstacking the wooden blocks Ted had found at a market stall, and something would happen in his face, some private feeling that had no word yet, and the nearest lamp would produce a small sound of protest and go dark. The first time, Andromeda replaced the bulb. The second time, she sat on the floor beside him and said, "Harry." "No," and Harry looked at her with the lamp-bursting expression, and then looked at the lamp, and the lamp came back on again, which he was not sure was better. "He did that," Nymphadora said from the doorway, 9 years old and visibly delighted. "He did. I used to do that with cups. You used to do it with cups, and also with the front window." Nymphadora accepted this without visible guilt. "Do you think he'll do the window? Not if I can help it," Andromeda said. The Trace watched for underage magic, primarily in Muggle households, where any unexplained event stood out against a background of nothing. In a household like theirs, with self-mending tea towels and a clock on the landing that corrected itself when moved, and Nymphadora's Tuesday habit of going involuntarily pink before breakfast, Harry's lamps vanished into the ambient noise without remark. This had been one of Andromeda's calculations on the night she decided to go, and she had been right about it, and she allowed herself one quiet moment of satisfaction at having been right, and then put the satisfaction away and got on with the work. The work was considerable. She placed every household ward she knew in the first month. She contacted people she trusted, which was not a long list but was a careful one, witches and wizards on the periphery of Dumbledore's network, people who had spent the war doing the kind of work that did not get reported in the Prophet, who knew things about protective magic that did not appear in any standard curriculum. She did not tell Harry about any of it. He was 15 months old. But she conducted herself as though an attack was possible at any time, because it was, and the habit of that vigilance was the thing she was building, and you built it before you needed it or not at all. Dumbledore, she understood, was watching. She felt this the way you felt a thing you could not see, in the slight sense of being attended to, in the too convenient timing of certain useful pieces of information that arrived through channels without obvious origin. She did not resent it. She had told him she would find another way, and she was finding it, and she suspected they both understood that they were going to be doing this together whether they liked it or not, in the specific way of two people who disagreed about methods. The first owl from Grimmauld Place arrived in the spring of 1982. She recognized the handwriting before she read the address. Her mother's script had a particular quality, precision and contempt, in equal measure. Every letter formed as though the act of forming it was beneath Wahlberger's notice, and she was doing it anyway through sheer will. The letter was addressed to Andromeda, not Black, not Tonks, simply Andromeda, which in Wahlberger's taxonomy was roughly equivalent to addressing it to nobody at all. The letter was not long. Her mother had never favored length when brevity could wound more precisely. She had heard, the letter said, that Andromeda had taken the Potter boy. She wished to understand on what grounds a burned-off name presumed to make a claim of blood lineage. She wished to understand how a woman who had chosen to marry beneath herself in every conceivable direction had come to represent the House of Black in any public capacity. She wished Andromeda to know that she found this entire situation a humiliation, a half-blood child in a household that had no legitimate claim to the name, being raised under circumstances that Wahlberger found impossible to sanction. The final sentence of the letter sat at the bottom of the page like something that had been placed there after some consideration and was not going to be taken back. I will say only this: a Black held the line when no one else would. Whatever that is worth, it is worth something. Andromeda read this 3 times. She did not write back. She set the letter in a drawer that she did not open very often and went to find Harry, who was at that moment discovering what cups could be made to do, and she stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the cup refill itself, and thought about the precise and terrible thing her mother could not bring herself to say outright, and which she would carry to her grave before she said it, to anyone who could use it against her. By Harry's 2nd birthday, celebrated with a cake Ted made, and Nymphadora decorated by changing the icing 17 times, he had arrived at language. He called Ted by name reliably. He called Nymphadora Dora because the extra syllable defeated him, and Nymphadora had accepted this as the finest development of the year. And he called Andromeda. Something that had started as a sound and slowly, over months, acquired the shape of a word that was not her name and not a title, and she did not correct it. He was a quiet child in the way of children who are paying close attention. He watched the photographs on the mantelpiece the way adults watched people, with purpose, looking for information. She had put up the ones. She had Lily and James at a summer party, both of them laughing. The photograph moved on its loop as wizarding photographs did. Lily leaning into James's shoulder, James turning to say something to her, both of them caught in that one bright moment on repeat. Harry would stand at the mantelpiece on his toes and watch them, and say nothing. She waited for him to ask. He was 2, and then 2.5, and then 3, and the question took its time. "Who are they?" he asked one morning, reaching toward the frame. Andromeda crouched beside him so they were level. "Those are your mummy and daddy," she said. "Their names were Lily and James. They loved you very much." She had been practicing this sentence since November 1981, and it came out the way she intended. Even unhurried, not a performance of grief, but a plain statement of true things. Lily laughed at something James said on her loop. "Where did they go?" he asked. "Away," Andromeda said. "There was a man who hurt them, and they went away. They won't be coming back." Harry considered this. "Like Mrs. Pemberton's dog," he said. Mrs. Pemberton's dog had been a matter of considerable neighborhood discussion the previous month. "Yes," Andromeda said, "because 3-year-olds needed footholds, and this was as good as any." "A bit like Mrs. Pemberton's dog." Harry patted the mantelpiece once, which was his signal that he was done with the thing for now, and went back to his blocks. "She did not name the man who had hurt his parents, beyond the man who hurt your parents. He was 3. 3 was not the age for the rest of it. She did not name Sirius at all. The Godfather story was too large and too knotted, and she would not give a toddler the beginning of something she could not yet give him the middle or the end of. She would tell him in pieces, as he was ready, on her timeline. This was the only piece of the situation she had decided to control absolutely. September of 1984 had been scheduled for years, and arrived anyway. Harry had turned 4 in July, at a birthday party with a magically expanding cake that Ted had attempted, and Andromeda had rescued, and Nymphadora had improved, with several unauthorized color modifications. Nymphadora had turned 11 in the summer, approximately, given the circa in everything the lexicon had ever said about her birth year, and had received her Hogwarts letter in July and read it 4 times over breakfast, and then carried it in her pocket for 2 weeks. They went to King's Cross on the 1st of September. Harry held Andromeda's hand on platform 9 3/4 and studied the Hogwarts Express with the expression he reserved for things he had known about in theory. He had understood, in the abstract, that Dora was going to Hogwarts. What he had not understood was that going meant the train, and the train meant the platform, and the platform meant standing here, watching her go through a barrier with her trunk. Nymphadora knelt down to his level on the platform, and her hair went orange, bright, almost aggressive orange, the most obvious thing in the vicinity. It was deliberate. She had picked it on purpose, Andromeda understood, so that it would be the last thing Harry saw of her and the easiest thing to hold on to. He reached for it immediately. She caught his hand and pressed it flat to the top of her head. "I'm coming back for Christmas," she said. "That's only a few months. Mum will show you on the calendar." Harry nodded in the careful way he had when he was accepting a thing provisionally. "And I'll write letters. You can't write back yet, but tell Mum what to say." She pulled him in and held him hard, and then she stood and hugged Andromeda, and then she picked up her trunk and went through the barrier, and she was gone. Harry stood on the platform and looked at the place where she had been. Andromeda put her hand on his shoulder. He leaned back against her legs just slightly and did not say anything. The platform had mostly emptied around them, and the train had made its long whistle somewhere beyond the barrier, and Harry was 4 years old. He understood exactly enough about leaving to know. Andromeda stood and watched him understand this and thought, "There are 3 years of this ahead of you, and I will not be able to explain to you why it is worth it until much later. And this is one of the things that nobody tells you when you decide to become the person who keeps someone safe." She took his hand, and they went home. The owl from the solicitor arrived in February of 1985. It was a formal letter, heavy paper, a wax seal, the particular density that wizarding legal firms favored when they wanted the weight of the thing to be felt before the contents were read. It informed Andromeda, as a matter of professional courtesy and in the interest of complete notification of all relevant parties, that Walburga Black of 12 Grimald Place, London, had died. The estate, per the terms of Black family succession and the relevant provisions of wizarding inheritance law, passed in its entirety to the next of kin, being Sirius Orion Black, currently detained at Her Majesty's prison, Azkaban. The letter noted, with the polite formality of something stated only because the process required it, that Andromeda was not named in the will she had not expected to be. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it, and she did not feel what she expected to feel, which was the confirmation that she had been waiting for, that certain doors were now closed permanently, that certain weights had been put down. She had thought it would feel like relief. It felt like the closing of a door that had always been locked. There was a specific category of feeling she had worked out over the years, for the death of someone who had wounded you carefully and then kept on loving you in their own damaged way, and whom you had loved back in spite of better judgment. It was not grief exactly. It was the specific weight of knowing that the complicated thing had ended without being resolved, and that it was never going to be resolved, because one of the people needed to resolve it was gone. 12 Grimmauld Place was Sirius's now. The ancestral home of the House of Black, the portrait gallery, the elf heads mounted along the staircase, the tapestry room where names were burned off when the family decided someone no longer counted belonged to a man in Azkaban for murder, who had no way to take possession of it and no one to administer it on his behalf. The house would sit empty and dark and full of its own history, with no one to walk through it. And it would do this until Sirius walked out of prison or died in it. Whichever came first, she folded the letter. She put it in the drawer with Wahlberger's owl from 1982. Then she went to make dinner. Harry asked about the Black family that spring because he was 5 years old and had the 5-year-old's specific gift for choosing exactly the wrong moment. She was peeling potatoes when he came into the kitchen and climbed onto the chair across from her and said, with the directness of someone who had been building toward a question for some time, "Mum, where did you come from before?" "I came from a family." Andromeda said, "In London, what were they like?" She kept peeling. "They believed some things that weren't true," she said. They believed that certain people were worth more than others because of who their parents were. They believed this very strongly, and for a very long time, Harry considered this. "That's not true, though. No, it isn't." "Why did they think it?" "Because it's what they'd been taught," she said. "And because it was easier than thinking something different. And because believing it let them feel important without doing anything to earn it." He was quiet for a moment, working through this with the focused attention he reserved for things he considered significant. "Did you believe it?" "When you were little for a while," Andromeda said, "before I knew better." She looked up at him. "I met your Uncle Ted," she said, "and he was the best person I had ever met, and I decided that anyone who told me he was worth less than them was simply wrong. And I left." Harry nodded, satisfied with this as an answer. Then, "Do you miss them?" She set down the potato and the peeler and looked at the kitchen table for a moment. The question was simple. The honest answer was the size of a drawer full of letters she had never sent and letters she had not answered, and one dry legal notice about a house she would never set foot in. "It's complicated," she said. He looked at her, and the look understood more than the words. "Okay," he said, and got down from the chair and went back to whatever he had been doing. She did not tell him about Sirius. She could not name the godfather without naming the accused murderer, and she could not explain the accused murderer without explaining what a godfather was supposed to be and what it meant that Harry's had been sitting in Azkaban since before Harry could walk. She would tell him in pieces, on his timeline, on her terms. This was one piece she was not ready to cut yet. The letters from Nymphadora came every week during term, and they were the most chaotic documents Andromeda had ever received, which was a significant statement. From her first years at Hogwarts, they arrived in envelopes, that somehow always managed to be slightly damp or slightly scorched, or folded at a peculiar angle that suggested the owl had made the journey under unusual conditions. The letters themselves were enthusiastic in the way of someone who has encountered more things than they have words for, and is attempting to use all available words anyway. She had views on charms, excellent, self-evidently the best subject, and stronger views on potions, which she described as an ongoing personal catastrophe across multiple letters and at least 3 replaced cauldrons. She had made friends whose names she did not include, but who were described by their most identifying qualities: the one who found everything funny, the one who was extremely serious about Quidditch, the one who had lent Nymphadora a hat in her 2nd week and subsequently become essential. She also, reliably, at the end of every letter, turned to Harry. "Tell Harry," I said, "he'd better not have done anything I would have done. Tell Harry I've learned a color change charm, and I'm saving it for his birthday. Tell Harry I heard from Mum that he got top marks in reading, and I'm choosing to take personal credit. Tell Harry," and this arrived when Harry was 7, in Nymphadora's 3rd year, in handwriting that climbed upward at the end of every line, "Tell Harry that I miss him a ridiculous amount, and that I'm coming home for Christmas as fast as the train will go." Harry could not yet read her handwriting reliably, so Andromeda read the letters aloud at breakfast, in a version of Nymphadora's voice that made Ted set down his coffee more than once. Harry listened with the expression he used for things he considered essential information, and occasionally requested that particular letters be read again. Ted handled the Muggle school. He found it, enrolled Harry in it, walked Harry to it on the first morning without making it a ceremony, which was exactly right. He was a Muggle-born wizard who had lived in both worlds his entire life, and he was the architect of the balance he and Andromeda had decided to build. Harry would know he was a wizard, would know the shape of the life that was coming, and would also know how to function in the world that the rest of his school was navigating. Neither half of this would be hidden from the other. Harry was not unhappy at school. This was what Andromeda had worried about most, and it was, on balance, fine. He was different, and he knew it, and he was careful. He made friends. He was good at things that required the kind of instincts she suspected would translate later to something she hadn't named to him yet. He was sometimes lonely, in the particular way of a child who has a second self he cannot share with anyone nearby, and she could see this in him and could not fix it, and waited for the years to carry him toward the place where it would stop being a wound. He asked about Sirius Black in the autumn of 1988. He had seen the name in the Prophet. She had not kept the paper from him, which would have been both pointless and counterproductive. And she had noticed him working something out for several weeks, in the particular silence he used for things he was assembling carefully before he was ready to say them. Then one evening he came to find her in the sitting room and sat down across from her with his hands folded in his lap, which was his posture for things he had decided to voice. "Who was Sirius Black to my parents?" he asked. Andromeda set down her book. "He was your father's best friend," she said. "They were at Hogwarts together, very close, from what I understood." She kept her voice even. "He was also your godfather. That's what James and Lily named him. The person who takes care of a child if something happens to their parents." Harry was very still, and then he betrayed them. Andromeda said, "Well, he told the people who were hunting your parents where they were hiding. 13 people died. He's been in Azkaban since the night your parents were killed." She believed this entirely. She had no reason not to. Harry was quiet for a while. The clock on the mantelpiece marked the time. "So you claimed me because he couldn't," Harry said. Andromeda looked at him. He was 8 years old, and he had assembled something with patience and care, and arrived at a conclusion that was not wrong and not quite right either, and was the kind of thing that deserved a true answer rather than a comfortable one. "I claimed you," she said, "because you were there, and no one else would." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, picked up the chapter book he'd been working through, and they sat in the sitting room together while the evening settled in, and the autumn dark came on, and neither of them said anything more. She had told him the truth as she understood it, all the parts of the truth she had. She had told him most of it. By the time Harry was 10, he could have told you most of the shape of his own story. His parents were Lily and James Potter. They had been killed on the 31st of October 1981, when Harry was 15 months old, by a man named Voldemort, who had been hunting them for most of the previous year. Voldemort had used a killing curse that had rebounded off Harry, left the scar on his forehead, and reduced Voldemort to something that was not quite dead and not quite alive, a wraith Andromeda had said, which was the most accurate word for something the wizarding world was still working out how to describe. There was a prophecy, spoken before Harry was born, which had led Voldemort to choose Harry specifically as the child it referred to. The prophecy described a boy who would have the power to defeat Voldemort when the time came. Voldemort had not been defeated permanently. He would return. Harry had known all of this since he was 9, which was roughly the age at which Andromeda had decided he was ready for the whole structure at once, rather than piece by piece. She had told him on an unremarkable Tuesday evening, sitting across from him at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her voice even, the way she told all difficult things, steadily, without softening them into something easier that would have to be revised later. He had asked questions, she had answered them. He had gone to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time, and by morning he had integrated it into the shape of everything else he already knew, which was not the same as finding it easy to carry, but was the way he had always managed it. What he did not know, or knew only partly, was why Andromeda specifically. He understood the ledger she had described: Sirius imprisoned, Regulus and Orion gone, Bellatrix in Azkaban, Walburga dead, Narcissa entangled with people who would never have sheltered a half-blood child. He understood that she was the only Black who was both free and willing. What he had never quite been given was why no one else, why not, for instance, the quiet man who came once a year and sat in the sitting room with the particular posture of someone who finds small spaces difficult. His name was Remus Lupin. He brought Harry books about defensive magic theory, always ones a year or two ahead of his level, and he had kind, tired eyes and the look of a man considerably older than he probably was, and he spoke to Harry with the attentiveness of someone who finds the person in front of them genuinely worth attending to. Harry liked him without entirely knowing why. He had never asked Andromeda the direct question. He was 10, and he had grown up understanding that the right question asked at the wrong time could close a door that would have opened on its own, and he was willing to wait. Nymphadora came home in June of 1991 with her Hogwarts trunk and a certificate and news. The news was that she had been accepted into Auror training. She announced this at dinner, before she had taken off her traveling cloak or sat down or done anything else, because she was Nymphadora, and she had never in her life managed to save good news for the appropriate moment. Her hair went gold the instant she said it, which suggested she had been holding it back for a long time. Ted put down his fork. Andromeda's face did the specific thing it did when she was pleased, and was trying not to make too large a thing of it. Harry was 11 in 5 weeks, and he had been braced for this moment since September, when he had calculated, lying awake the night before Nymphadora's 7th year started doing the arithmetic, that when she graduated, she would be applying to Auror training and not coming back to live here. He had known this was coming. He was still not ready for it. She dropped her trunk in the hallway, pulled him up from his chair, and held him hard in the way she did things. Without hesitation, entirely. "I'll be back," she said, into the top of his hair. "For Christmas and summers, and whenever I can manage it. And when you're at Hogwarts, I'll have someone on the inside." She pulled back to look at him. "I'll always come back." "That's a promise." Harry nodded. She had never, in his experience, broken a promise. He chose to consider this an adequate foundation. The letter arrived on the 16th of July. He had known it was coming, and he had still not entirely prepared himself for the specific feeling of holding it in his hands. The heavy parchment, the green ink, the Hogwarts seal in wax, and his name on the front. Harry James Potter, C.O. Andromeda Tonks. The school knew where he was. The address was a statement of fact. Here is where the wizarding world has located you. Here is what it wants from you now. Here is the institutional form of a thing that has been true his entire life, being confirmed in green ink. He had been expecting the letter since he was 7. He had been waiting for it in the specific way of someone who has been told the story of a journey they are going to take and has been watching the door ever since. He still stood at the kitchen table for a long moment before he sat down to read it. Andromeda watched him from across the kitchen. She looked, he thought, like a woman who had been waiting for this particular morning for approximately 10 years, and who had kept herself from saying so in exactly the way she kept herself from saying most things, by being very still and trusting that he would understand without being told. He understood. They went to Diagon Alley in the last week of July on a bright and inconvenient Tuesday. Harry had been to Diagon Alley before. In the abstract of early childhood, he had a memory of being small and wide-eyed somewhere that smelled of candle wax and flue powder, though the details were uncertain. He had not been back since he was old enough to properly retain it. He knew what it was. He had known in outline since he could read. The leaky cauldron was the entrance. The courtyard wall opened with 3 taps on a specific brick. Gringotts was at the far end. Ollivander's was on the west side of the alley. What he had not anticipated was the staring. It started at the leaky cauldron. A man at a corner table looked up, and then looked again, and then said something to the woman beside him. By the time they were through the archway and into Diagon Alley proper, Harry had counted 3 separate people who had stopped walking. He kept his eyes ahead and matched Andromeda's pace and understood, for the first time in a concrete way, that the scar on his forehead was a legible thing in this world. He had known it in the same way. He had known everything else. It was different to feel it. Gringotts was first. The goblins processed Harry's visit to Vault 687 with the complete indifference of people for whom the spectacle of a famous child has no professional relevance, which was the most comfortable interaction Harry had had all morning. The vault itself was banked with galleons that had been sitting untouched since 1981. James Potter's inheritance, the fortune built from Fleamont Potter's Sleekeasy's hair potion. Harry stood at the vault door and looked at it for a moment. He had known it existed. He had not thought very much about what it would feel like to see his parents' money stacked in the dark, waiting for him because they had not survived to spend it. He thought about it now. Then he took what he needed for the year and told the goblin he was ready to go. Madame Malkin's was efficient and impersonal, which was fine. Flourish and blots required him to navigate 2 separate attempts at conversation from strangers who wanted to tell him what his survival had meant to them, which Andromeda deflected with a pleasantness that had iron in it. Ollivander's, at the end of the afternoon, was something else. The shop was narrow and dim, and the air smelled of sawdust and something older underneath it. and Mr. Ollivander himself emerged from the back with the specific attentiveness of a man who has been waiting for a particular customer without knowing quite when they would arrive. He measured Harry's wand arm without speaking and began pulling boxes. 14 attempts. 15. Harry picked up each wand, and something was wrong, almost but not quite. Then the 16th, Hollywood and a phoenix feather, 11 inches, and when Harry lifted it, the feeling was not wonder, it was not surprise. It was the particular sensation of something settling into the place it had always meant to occupy, a rightness that had nothing to do with the wand being extraordinary, and everything to do with the simple fact that this one was his. He lowered it and looked at Ollivander. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander said, in the tone of a man confirming something he had suspected for some time. 11 inches. Supple. Curious. Very curious. He considered Harry for a moment with the pale, unsettling eyes that the shop seemed designed to enhance. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter. I expect you will do great things." Harry thanked him and paid for the wand. Andromeda did not ask, on the walk back, what it had felt like. He was grateful for this. He was not sure he had words for it yet, that were not embarrassingly large for what had actually happened, which was a person picking up a piece of wood and feeling that it was correct. He held the wand box under his arm and walked and thought about it quietly, which was his preferred way of thinking about most things. The night before the 1st of September, Harry sat on the floor of his room, surrounded by the organized wreckage of packing, and considered the trunk that was now, for better or worse, full. He could hear Andromeda in the hallway. The door was open. He did not look up. "Are you going to tell me to be careful?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. He looked up then, and she was in the doorway with her arms folded, and she was looking at him with the expression she kept for things she had decided not to say, because she trusted him to hear them anyway. "You've always been careful," she said. "Be brave instead." He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the 10 years of mornings that had accumulated between that first night in November 1981 and this one, the household wards, and the annual inspection of the protections and the book she had given him, and the truths she had told him, one at a time, until the whole structure of it was his to carry. He thought about what it had cost her to build all of that, and what it was costing her now to stand in a doorway and tell him to be brave instead. "Okay," he said. She nodded once, which was what Andromeda did instead of most things, and went back down the hall. Harry turned back to his trunk. He fastened the latches. He turned off the light, and the room settled around him in the dark. And in the morning, the train would take him north. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock, and Harry had a compartment to himself until somewhere past the northern edge of London. He had found a seat without difficulty. He had passed through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 before, and had not been performing bewilderment for anyone's benefit, which meant he could simply walk to a compartment and sit down and look out the window at the platform, sliding away from him, and think. He was doing a great deal of thinking. He had been told the shape of the year ahead in considerable detail, and he was fitting that shape against the reality of the train, the smell of the compartment, the particular sound of a door sliding open in the next car and then closing again, and finding that it mostly matched. The first person to open his compartment door was a round-faced boy clutching a large spotted toad with the specific desperation of someone who has already lost it once today and is not going to let it happen again. "Sorry," the boy said, already backing out. "I was looking for—" "Sorry, it's fine," Harry said. "You can sit here if you want." The boy looked at him with the wary gratitude of someone who is expecting the offer to have conditions. He sat down cautiously. The toad made a sound. "I'm looking for my toad," the boy said, then apparently remembered he was holding it. "His name's Trevor. I lost him on the platform, and then I found him, but I'm afraid Sorry. I'm Neville Longbottom." Harry looked at him. Neville Longbottom, round-faced and anxious, toad in both hands, speaking to the scar without quite meeting his eyes. He had known this name in the abstract for as long as he had known anything. The other child, the one the prophecy might equally have described, the boy Voldemort had not chosen. Meeting him in person was strange in the way of encountering a place you have known from maps. "Harry Potter," Harry said. Neville said, "I know," in the slightly apologetic way of someone who is afraid that knowing is rude. "That's all right," Harry said. "Most people seem to." They sat in companionable silence for a while, which was the sort of silence Harry was comfortable with, and which Neville appeared to find less comfortable, but was gamely attempting. Harry watched the countryside replacing the city outside the window, and thought about the boy across from him, nervous in a way that Harry recognized as the particular nervousness of someone who has been told they have a great deal to live up to and is already fairly certain they won't manage it. He thought about the prophecy, and about Voldemort's choice, and about the specific luck, if it could be called that, of being the one who had been chosen. He did not say any of this. It was the third day he had known Neville Longbottom, approximately, and it seemed too large to say. The compartment door opened again an hour before Scotland, and a boy appeared with blonde hair so pale it was nearly silver, and grey eyes and the particular quality of expression of someone who has spent 11 years being told he was the most important person in most rooms. He looked at Harry, and something shifted in his face. Not surprise, Harry thought, but a rapid recalculation of a situation he had thought he already understood. "Harry Potter," the boy said. Not a question. "Draco Malfoy," Harry said. This produced a pause. "You know who I am. Your mother's Narcissa," Harry said. "Your mother and my and Andromeda are sisters. I've seen pictures." He watched Draco take this, in the information that the person he had come to impress already knew his family structure, and that the connection in question was not a flattering one in Draco's terms. Draco's jaw tightened. "Andromeda Tonks," Draco said, in the careful tone of someone handling something distasteful. "Yes," Harry said pleasantly. The offer of friendship that followed was careful and qualified. Draco spoke about families that mattered, about the importance of knowing the right people, about what Harry might find useful to understand before he got to school. Harry listened to it with the patient attention of someone who has been navigating family politics since before he could read and recognize the structure. Immediately, the extended hand, the implicit condition, the framing of alliance as benefit. He waited until Draco finished. "I think I'll figure out who's worth knowing when I get there," Harry said. "Thank you." Draco left. Neville had watched this entire exchange with the expression of someone witnessing something he did not quite follow, but was fairly sure was significant. The sorting began with the Sorting Hat's song, which Harry listened to for its content rather than its spectacle. He had known about the 4 houses his entire life, not in the abstract way of Muggle-raised children who might have encountered it in passing, but in the specific, political way of someone who had grown up in a household where the distinction mattered. Andromeda had not told him which house to want. She had also not pretended the distinctions were meaningless. He had spent considerable thought on the question. He sat down under the hat, and the hat, after a moment's silence, began to talk. It said things he had expected it to say, that there was courage here, and loyalty, and a brain that had been put to work earlier than most, and it said one thing he had not expected, which was that it found him interesting in a way it had not found a student interesting in some years, and that it was going to take a moment. He sat under the hat in a great hall full of hundreds of people and was examined, which was the most unusual sensation he had experienced so far at Hogwarts, and he had been there for approximately 4 hours. In the end, the hat said Gryffindor, and the table on the far left erupted. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down amid people he did not yet know and who were looking at him with the specific excitement of people who have been told a famous name and are now confronted with the person behind it. The wizarding world knew Harry Potter existed, had been wondering, Harry suspected, for 10 years where he had been and what he had been doing. They were going to find out, over the course of a year, that the answer was he had been paying attention. Potions class was on Thursday, and it was the beginning of something. Professor Snape swept in and immediately produced in Harry the sense of looking at a person who was performing composure very skillfully. He was not performing it badly. Another student might not have noticed. Harry had grown up watching Andromeda perform composure skillfully, which was a different thing from actually having it, and he had learned to recognize the difference. Snape stood at the front of the dungeon classroom with his arms folded and his dark eyes moving across the students, and when they reached Harry, they stopped for one fraction of a moment too long, and then continued. Harry had Lily's eyes. He had known this since he was small enough for it to be a simple fact. He had not thought very much, until now, about what it would be like for someone who had known Lily to look at those eyes in Harry's face. He watched Snape move through the lesson and talk about the subtle science of potion making with the controlled precision of someone for whom this work was genuinely important. And he answered the questions directed at him without false modesty or performance. And Snape found other reasons to find fault, because the particular shape of Snape's hostility was legible, and he had the patience for it, the thing Snape could not say, and which was visible underneath the professional coldness anyway. This was not what Snape had believed would happen. It was not, Harry suspected, what Snape had found a way to prepare for. McGonagall came to Dumbledore's office in October, the way she came at the beginning of every year to report on the first years. "He's settled well," she said. "Better than I expected. He's prepared, ahead of most of them in theory, though his practical work will need development like any other students." She paused. "He's not what I expected." "No," Dumbledore said. "He wouldn't be. He's not performing difficulty. He doesn't have. He didn't come here lost." She said this with the particular quality of someone for whom this was more significant than it appeared. Dumbledore looked at the window and at the grounds below it, and thought about a child with no bond of blood seal who had spent 10 years in a magical household being told the truth. "Minerva," he said. "Keep a close eye on Professor Quirrell." "I've had the same thought," McGonagall said. He said nothing else. He had been watching Quirrell since August, and watching the third-floor corridor since September, and watching Harry Potter since the night Andromeda Tonks had stepped in front of a Privet Drive doorstep and changed the calculation. He did not know which concern would resolve itself first, and he found he was not entirely able to distinguish, at this point, which one worried him more. Harry wrote to Andromeda in the second week of October from a desk in the Gryffindor common room by firelight. He told her that he was fine. He told her about herbology, which was more manageable than he had expected, and less theoretical, which he found he preferred. He told her about his classes, in the general sense, omitting potions, because the thing he would have wanted to say about potions was not something that fit on a letter and would worry her unnecessarily. He told her that the boy he had met on the train, the one with the toad, had a toad named Trevor, and had turned out to be excellent company once you established that you were not going to be difficult about things, which Harry considered an important baseline for any friendship. He did not tell her that he missed her. The letter already communicated this, and he saw no reason to be redundant about it. He signed it Harry. Not Harry Potter, not HJP, simply Harry, because that was the word for who he was and he had never had any question about it. Andromeda's response came 3 days later in an envelope worn slightly at the corners from the owl's speed. It was a single page. Harry took it up to his dormitory and read it by candlelight, with the curtains half drawn around his bed, and the sounds of the castle at night coming through the walls, the distant portraits arguing, a suit of armor doing something unaccountable on the floor above. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it under his pillow and lay in the dark, which was a different dark from the dark at home, but was dark all the same, and thought that this was manageable. Most things were manageable, given sufficient information and adequate preparation. He thought he had been given both. Harry noticed Professor Quirrell in the first week of term and spent the next 2 months deciding what to do about it. The noticing was not dramatic. It accumulated the way Andromeda had taught him most things worth knowing did, a detail at a time, unremarkable individually, significant in aggregate. The stutter was the first thing. Not a nervousness stutter that worsened under pressure, but a stutter that appeared when Quirrell was performing nervousness for an audience and disappeared when he forgot to. Harry had spent enough time around Andromeda's particular stillness under stress to recognize performed anxiety when he saw it. The garlic smell was the second thing. Persistent and total. Not the smell of a person who had eaten garlic recently, but of a person wearing it. The third thing was the avoidance. Quirrell never held eye contact for more than a second, never fully turned his back to the room, wore his purple turban with the specific care of something being protected. Harry filed all of this in the part of his mind reserved for things requiring ongoing attention and went to his other classes. He had been made Seeker in September. McGonagall had seen him catch something in midair on a broom he had barely mounted and had appeared at his shoulder afterward with the expression of someone who has just identified a useful resource and intends to make use of it. He had not told Andromeda immediately. When he did, in a letter that also contained his potions essay marks and a description of the castle's tendency to have staircases that moved when they felt like it, she had written back, "Of course she did. Let me know if it interferes with your studying." The first Quidditch match was in November. Harry's broom started going wrong midway through the first half. He did not panic. He had not been raised to panic. He had been raised to assess a situation when it went wrong and identify the variable that had changed. What he established in approximately 30 seconds, fighting the broom to a standstill 40 feet above the pitch, was he had been flying correctly, and the broom had altered its behavior, which meant the broom had been altered. His eyes found Snape in the teacher's box, where Snape was watching him with narrowed focus and moving his lips. Snape was the most obvious suspect, being the most obvious person with a reason to wish Harry difficulty. Harry kept this conclusion on probation and focused on staying on the broom until the broom stopped being difficult. It did stop, eventually, and he caught the snitch 11 minutes later and won the match, which he suspected was not the intended outcome. He watched Snape afterward with the careful neutrality of ongoing investigation. What he saw, over December and into the new year, was that Snape was not avoiding Quirrell. Quite the opposite. Snape's gaze moved to Quirrell the way a person's hand moves toward a wound, involuntary, checking, uncomfortable. Snape was watching Quirrell. And Quirrell, whenever Snape's attention landed on him, broke eye contact immediately and found somewhere else to be. Not the behavior of an ally, the specific behavior of someone who is afraid of the person watching them. Harry revised his conclusion. He spent a week after that revision sitting with the new shape of the problem, which was considerably more interesting and considerably more alarming than the original one. If Quirrell was afraid of Snape, it was possible Snape had identified what was wrong with Quirrell. It was also possible that what was wrong with Quirrell had something to do with the third-floor corridor that the headmaster had mentioned on the first night was forbidden under pain of a particularly horrible death, and which Harry had therefore identified as the most significant location in the castle. He did not know what was in the corridor. He had made the obvious inference that whatever it was what Quirrell was after. He wrote to Andromeda in January. The letter was careful. He described a teacher whose behavior he found inconsistent, the symptoms he had observed, the revision he had made to his initial theory about a second teacher. He did not use names. Andromeda had always told him that a letter was only as private as the owl carrying it, and he had accordingly developed the habit of writing around the specifics when the specifics mattered. He asked for her thoughts on the methodology, not the conclusion. Her response came 6 days later. She had, characteristically, understood the specifics he had not included. If you're right, she had written, "Do not act alone. Tell McGonagall." He read this instruction with the seriousness it deserved. He respected it. He also knew, with the particular certainty of someone who knows themselves fairly well, that if it came to the point where he could either tell McGonagall or act alone, he was going to have to think very carefully about which of those he would actually do, and had written it anyway, because some things needed to be said even when both parties were aware of the limitations. He found the mirror in December, the week the other students had mostly gone home for Christmas. It was in an empty classroom on the 3rd floor, and he had not been looking for it. He had been exploring in the careful, methodical way of someone who thinks the map matters as much as the territory, and a locked door had turned out to be unlocked, and he had gone in on the principle that he wanted to know what was in every room he had access to. The mirror was tall, taller than any mirror had practical reason to be, with an inscription along the top that he recognized as an anagram, even before he had worked out what it said. He stood in front of it, and it showed him a room that looked like this room, and people standing in the way he was standing, and then his eyes found the people, and he stopped. They were looking at him. His mother had red hair and green eyes, his eyes which he had known about in the same way he had known most things, from Andromeda telling him and from the photographs on the mantelpiece that moved on their loops. But the photographs were small and old and caught in a single moment, and the mirror was large and present, and the woman in it was looking directly at him with the full weight of her attention, and beside her was his father, with unruly dark hair and a face that Harry understood with the strange quality of understanding. Was a face that could be described as his own face, if you accounted for the eyes. He stood there for a long time. He did not look for Andromeda. He understood, while he was standing there, why she was not in the mirror, because the mirror showed the thing you wanted most, and Andromeda was a presence in his life, warm and real and downstairs, in the kitchen on a Tuesday. What he wanted, and what he was never going to have, was this: 2 people alive, and looking at him, and the particular shape of a life that would have existed if they had not been killed before he could remember them. He stayed for long enough that he lost track of the time entirely. "I thought I might find you here." He did not spin around in shock, because he had heard footsteps several minutes ago and had been expecting someone. Dumbledore was standing near the doorway, which was behind and to the left of where Harry was standing, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry did not yet have enough experience of Dumbledore to read with precision, but which contained something careful and something alert. "Sit with me," Dumbledore said. They sat on the floor in front of the mirror, which Harry found unusual, and which Dumbledore appeared to find entirely appropriate. Harry looked at the image of his parents. Dumbledore did not look at the mirror. "What do you see?" Dumbledore asked. In canon, or rather in the way Harry had always imagined such a conversation going when he thought about it, this was where a child would be evasive, would say something deflecting. Harry was not interested in being evasive. "My parents," he said, "Lily and James. They're looking at me like they're glad to see me." A pause. Dumbledore said, "You are not going to tell me you see yourself holding a Quidditch cup?" "No," Harry said, "that's not what I see." Another pause, different in quality. "You know about the mirror," Dumbledore said. "Not a question. I know what it shows," Harry said. "I read about it. Andromeda had a book about magical artifacts and I was 8 and she left it on the kitchen table." He looked at the mirror. His parents were still looking at him. "I've been careful not to come back every night." "You were going to tell me that." Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that Harry looked at him. The expression on the old man's face was the one Harry had identified in their first encounter and had been watching since. The complicated fear that had nothing to do with Harry specifically and everything to do with something Dumbledore was calculating that Harry was adjacent to. "I was," Dumbledore said at last. "I was also going to tell you that the mirror will be moved. It is doing a job here that needs to be done, but it will be moved." He paused. "I am going to tell you something else instead." Harry waited. "I wish you had grown up with a different set of circumstances," Dumbledore said. "Not instead of the ones you had. I suspect the ones you had were, in their way, the best available to you, but the full complement, the ones you were meant to have alongside them." He said this with the precision of a man who has been weighing words carefully for several sentences. "You are, therefore, more prepared than I feared, and more at risk than I would like. Hogwarts has protections. They are not absolute." Harry understood what this was about. "She told me," he said. Dumbledore went very still. "What did she tell you?" he asked. Harry looked at the mirror. His parents looked back. His mother's expression, he thought, was one he had seen before. The expression that said, "I see you," specifically. And not just a general face, but the particular person looking out of it. He did not know if that was the mirror or if that was memory. "Everything," he said. The word sat in the room between them. The mirror offered nothing in response to it. The candle, somewhere to Harry's left, made the only sound in the room. He did not explain further. He had found, in 10 years of being told the truth, in careful measures, that the most powerful thing you could say was sometimes the simplest accurate one, and that you did not need to elaborate on a word that had already said everything it needed to say. He looked at the mirror for a little longer, then he stood up and went to bed. It was not recklessness that took Harry down through the trapdoor. He had been taught over the course of 11 years what recklessness looked like and why it was the wrong response to an emergency. Recklessness was acting on insufficient information. What he had was sufficient. He had confirmed Quirrell's role in the Quidditch jinx 3 months ago, and had spent the intervening time building a complete enough picture of what was happening in the 3rd-floor corridor, to say with reasonable confidence, someone was going to take what was down there tonight, and if he did not go, no one else would know what they were taking in time. He told himself this as he pulled open the trap door. He was afraid. He acknowledged the fear, the way Andromeda had taught him, named it, filed it, set it aside. He was afraid, and he was going anyway, which was the whole point of being afraid and knowing what it meant. The three-headed dog was asleep. It lay across the trapdoor leading down, filling the room with the slow, vast sound of three separate sets of lungs. Something had already lulled it, a magical harp in the corner, winding down on its own. Winding down on its own. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at three enormous heads, and moved through the room quickly. There were two of them with him. He did not look back to check. He already knew they had followed. The dark drop beneath the trapdoor opened into soft, clutching darkness. Devil's Snare, which he recognized from Andromeda's herbology primers before he had finished falling through it. He produced a light, and the tendrils recoiled, and they were through. The keys came next, a flock of them, winged and frantic, filling a high-ceiling chamber with the sound of rusted metal in motion. There was a broomstick. Harry took it without discussion. He was in the air in less than 10 seconds, eyes tracking the flock with the specific attention he had trained all year in seeker practice, filtering movement, isolating pattern, finding the one thing in motion that moved differently from everything around it. Their old iron, bent wing, its flight uneven from repeated use. He folded out of the air and caught it. The door opened. The chessboard filled the next chamber entirely. Pieces the height of adults, carved from stone and waiting. One of his companions sat down at the far side without being asked and said, "I'll handle this. What happened on that chessboard?" Was not something Harry watched closely. He kept his eyes forward and tracked the pieces by sound, the crack of stone on stone, the rhythm of the game playing out at speed, and tried not to think about what was happening behind him. When the sound changed into a single terrible impact, he turned. One of his companions was down, the other was already looking at Harry. "Go," she said. "I'll stay with him. Go." He went. The troll in the next chamber was already unconscious, having apparently resolved its situation without their assistance. He stepped around it. The final barrier was fire and bottles. A logic puzzle in the form of a potion, designed by someone who understood that not all intelligence is the same kind. His remaining companion moved through the chamber and bent over the 7 bottles with the focused economy of someone who has been solving problems like this. Her entire life, she straightened and named one. "That one gets you forward," she said. "There's enough for one person." She looked at him. "The other goes back. Take the one that goes back," Harry said. She held his gaze. "Don't die. I'm not planning to." He drank the bottle. Cold moved through him like stepping from a warm room into winter air, and the fire ahead dimmed and let him through. The final chamber was smaller than he had expected. In the center of it stood the mirror of Erist, which he recognized. He had stood before this mirror in December and had seen his parents. He had understood then that Dumbledore had moved it here and said it was doing a job. He understood the job now. He stood in front of it. His reflection reached into a pocket and closed its hand around something small, a red-faceted stone. And the reflection's face changed, the particular expression of a person who has found what they were looking for without intending to use it. He watched this and then checked his own pocket, and the stone was there, warm and solid, heavier than he expected for something the size of a walnut. He understood the mechanism. He had not come here wanting power. He had come here so that someone else could not have it. He closed his hand around the stone and kept it closed. Clever! He had known there was someone else in the room. He had known, since the cold entered the air, not from the potion but from something older. He turned. Quirrell was standing against the far wall. The stutter was gone. The avoidance of eye contact was gone. He was looking at Harry with the flat, assessing attention of someone who had spent a year performing nervousness and had grown tired of the performance. "You worked it out some months ago," Quirrell said. "You were very careful about it, I'll give you that. You stopped watching Snape just in time to avoid seeming obvious." "The turban," Harry said. It was not a question. Quirrell's hands moved to his head. He unwound the purple fabric in one slow, deliberate motion and let it fall to the stone floor. He turned around. Harry had been told about this. He had been told that Voldemort, reduced to something less than a body after the night his parents died, had been traveling through willing hosts while seeking a path back to power. He had been told this by Andromeda when he was 9 at the kitchen table, with her hands folded and her voice even. He had absorbed it and filed it under things with consequences that would eventually require managing. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was chalk white and nearly lipless, with red eyes that Harry recognized from his own scar pain in the night. He had been afraid of this face in dreams for 2 years. He had not known it would look exactly the way he had been afraid it would look. He was afraid. He did not look away. "Give me the stone." Voldemort's voice was thin and high and very precise. "You cannot win this. You are 11 years old. You are standing in a room with no protection worth the name. And you know what that means. The woman who kept you told you, and the old man who watches you fears it. Your mother's love burns this vessel when it touches you. I also know it is the whole of what you have." "It was enough to get me here," Harry said. For now Quirrell's body moved toward him with the smooth urgency of someone else operating the controls. "The protection your mother gave you acts against those who act in my name when they touch your skin. That is its specific limit. But I am not touching you." Quirrell's hand closed on Harry's arm. The burning started immediately, not in Harry, but in the hand, traveling up Quirrell's wrist and into his forearm, the skin blistering white and then darker as the hand jerked and tried to release and could not free itself. Quirrell screamed. Voldemort's voice cut over the scream with a command Harry did not recognize, and Quirrell tried to shake free, and Harry grabbed Quirrell's face with both hands. He did not think about it. It was a decision that skipped the deliberating part of the mind and went directly to the acting part, and what he felt under his hands was the specific wrongness of something that was already dying. Skin blistering under his palms, Quirrell struggling, the screaming getting louder, and then abruptly changing register into something that was not a scream anymore. And then Voldemort's voice, very close and very cold and entirely clear. The blood seal was never placed. Every protection the woman built is a candle in the open air. I have known since this autumn. I have been standing next to you since September, and I know exactly where you sleep. Harry held on. The pressure of Quirrell's hands on his arms decreased, then stopped, and then the chamber tilted, and the floor of it came up toward Harry very suddenly, and he had one clear thought before the dark took him. The stone was still in his pocket, and his hand was still closed around it. He woke in white. The hospital wing had the specific quality of a room designed to receive people who have recently had very bad experiences. Pale and quiet, organized for recovery. Dumbledore was sitting beside his bed. He had the expression Harry had first seen across the threshold of an argument 11 years ago, the one that contained both calculation and something older than calculation. The weight of a man who has been afraid for a child for a long time. "The stone," Harry said. "Safe," Dumbledore said. "It will not be an object of concern for much longer, Quirrell." A pause with something in it. Gone, he could not survive the connection being severed. Harry was quiet for a moment. He had not liked Quirrell, and had been right not to, and gone was still a word with a specific weight when applied to a person who had been alive yesterday. Voldemort said he knew. Harry said. He said the blood seal was never placed. He said he's known since September, where I sleep. Dumbledore did not look away. Yes, so he can find me, when he has a body again. He is a wraith. He has no body and no reliable agent. Dumbledore said this with the precision of a man being accurate about something he would prefer to be reassuring about. That will not change today or this summer. It will change eventually. She told me it would. Harry looked at the ceiling. She's been telling me it would since I was 9. She has told you, Dumbledore said quietly. Most of the relevant things. More, I think, than I intended. He paused. What happened here tonight is not something I can manage or contain. Voldemort knows the bond of blood was never placed. He knows it with the certainty of someone who has been in your presence for a year and felt the absence of it. This changes what he will do when he returns. She said we had better be ready. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. She was right. It was the first time Harry had heard Dumbledore say that, without the particular texture of saying it under duress. He filed this. He lay in the hospital wing for 2 days. He ate what was brought to him, and slept when the sleeping was available, and thought, in the long stretches of the night when neither of those things was an option, about Quirrell's face, and about Voldemort's voice saying, "I know where you sleep." He thought about the specific quality of certainty in that voice. Not a threat, not a boast, but a statement of tactical fact. The kind of information you shared with someone only because, sharing, it was part of the attack. He thought about Andromeda at the kitchen table 10 years ago, with her hands folded and her voice even, saying, "He will return. He is not gone. He exists as something less than a person, and he will spend however long it takes finding a way back. And when he does, the prophecy says you will have to face him." He had absorbed this then. He had not known what it would feel like to have faced him. It was exactly what he had been prepared for. Being prepared did not make it smaller. He thought about that for a while, about what it meant to have been told the truth in advance, and then to have the truth arrive anyway at its full size. He thought about Andromeda's voice in the dark after bad nights when he was small, saying, I know. That's the right response. Hold on to it." He held on to it. He did not write the letter. He decided he would tell her in person, in the kitchen, at the table where she had told him everything, when he could see her face. Harry came home in the 2nd week of June on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day, and walked through the front door into the smell of something cooking, and the sound of the radio in the kitchen, and the specific particular feeling of a house that had been carrying on without him. Ted was in the kitchen. He looked up when Harry came in, and the look on his face was the look Harry had seen every time he came back from anywhere, a kind of relief that had nothing performative about it. He put down what he was doing and said, "Sit down," in a way that meant he'd been waiting, and he was glad the waiting was over. Harry sat. Ted put food in front of him without asking if he wanted any, and Harry ate, because he had learned over 12 years that when Ted put food in front of you, it was because you needed it whether or not you currently felt that you did. Andromeda came in while he was eating. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same chair she always sat in, the one she'd sat in when she told him about Voldemort and about the prophecy, and about Sirius Black and about the bond of blood, and she folded her hands, which was her posture for listening, and she said, so he told her all of it. The trapdoor, the chambers, the mirror and the stone appearing in his pocket, and then Quirrell's face when the turban came off, and then Voldemort's voice. He told her what Voldemort had said in the specific words Voldemort had used. because she had always raised him to report accurately and not to soften the significant parts into something easier to receive. When he reached, "I know where you sleep," her expression did not change. He watched her not change her expression and said, "You're not surprised." "I'm not surprised," she agreed. "I've been expecting something like this since November 1981. She paused. "How are you?" This was a different question from, "How are you doing?" And he had grown up understanding the distinction. She was asking about the specific quality of the thing he was carrying, not whether he was functional. "I'm not sure yet," he said. "I think I will be." She nodded once, which was what she did, instead of several things. "Nymphadora is coming for the weekend," she said. "She doesn't know yet. I'd like to be the one to tell her, if that's all right." "That's fine," Harry said. Ted refilled his water glass without being asked. The three of them sat in the kitchen for a while, which was not silence so much as the absence of anything that needed to be said out loud. In the week after Harry came home, Andromeda went to work on the house. Harry had grown up in a household that was already more warded than most, the practical result of 11 years of a woman who had understood from the first night that she was providing the only protection between a particular child and anyone who wanted to reach him. He had known in an abstract way what this meant. The charms on the doors and windows, the alert system she'd built through channels she hadn't named to him, the specific way she'd arranged the household so that nothing magical could pass the threshold without her knowing. What she did that June was different in kind, not just degree. She contacted people, names Harry did not recognize, but whose owls arrived daily, sometimes twice daily, with dense and technical correspondence that Andromeda read at the kitchen table with a focused expression he associated with her most serious thinking. She placed new wards. She replaced several existing ones with better versions. She had apparently been researching for some time, which suggested she had been waiting for this or something like it, and had prepared accordingly. She asked Ted something specific about what he would and wouldn't consent to, in the precise way she asked him things, when the answer would have real consequences, and Ted said yes, without taking very long to think about it. Harry did not ask directly what was being discussed. He understood approximately that the question involved a Fidelius charm, the most powerful concealment magic available, requiring a secret keeper who could carry the knowledge of the house's location. As an inviolable secret, he had read about the Fidelius charm. He had read about it because his parents had used one, and it had not saved them. And Andromeda had always been of the view that you examined the failures of protective magic, at least as carefully as you examined the successes. He did not ask who the secret keeper would be. He trusted that she had thought about this more carefully than he could. Dumbledore arrived on a Thursday in late June. He came to the front door and knocked, which was itself a statement. Dumbledore was a man who could have found other ways of making his presence known, and knocking at the door of the house he'd spent 11 years worrying about was a deliberate choice about what the visit was going to be. Andromeda opened the door herself and stood in the doorway for a moment without moving aside. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't expect you," she said. "I know," Dumbledore said. "May I come in?" She moved aside. Harry was at the kitchen table with a book when they went into the sitting room, and the door did not close fully, which he suspected was not an accident on anyone's part. He kept reading and listened. "The proposal is straightforward," Dumbledore said. He had a way of stating things that acknowledged the difficulty of them without letting the difficulty alter the statement. Petunia Dursley is alive. She remains at 4 Privet Drive. The charm requires only that she choose to take Harry in. The language of the magic is take in, which I believe can accommodate a guest arrangement of some duration each summer. Not permanent residence, not a second home. a visit annually of sufficient length for the charm to anchor. You're asking me to send a 12-year-old boy to spend a portion of his summers with a woman who has never met him and has no interest in him," Andromeda said. "To repair a charm that could have been placed in November 1981 if I had not intervened. I am asking you to consider what will protect him. I have been considering what will protect him for 11 years. It is the primary activity of my adult life." The quality of her voice was the one Harry associated with the moments just before something definitive was said. He is not going to Petunia Dursley's house. Andromeda, he is not. A pause. You placed that charm at Privet Drive because Lily's blood running in Petunia's veins was the anchor. I understand the mechanism. I have understood it since you explained it to me the morning after I claimed him. I have also understood, for 11 years, that the charm is lost because of the choice I made. That is a consequence I accepted. I will not now shift that consequence onto him by sending him as a guest to a woman who does not want him in a house where he is not known, to sit long enough each summer that the magic decides he's been taken in. He is 12 years old. He fought Voldemort in a basement in June. He is not going to spend his summers in Surrey to satisfy a technicality. The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone absorbing an argument they cannot immediately answer. "That is very principled," Dumbledore said at last. "Yes, and it will not protect him. I am aware." Another pause. "Then what will?" "What I'm already doing," Andromeda said. "What I've been doing since 1981. Better wards, better allies, better information. A Fidelius charm with a secret keeper, I trust. And a boy who knows his own situation clearly enough not to be ambushed by it." She paused. "You told me in 1981 that the bond of blood would have made Privet Drive unreachable to anything acting in Voldemort's name. You were right. What I have instead is not a sealed safe house. It is a household that has been prepared, continuously, by someone who understood the threat from the first night. Those are not the same thing. One is better than the other, in some ways and worse in others. And I have lived with that calculation for 11 years. And I am not interested in revisiting the foundational terms of it. He told you, Dumbledore said. In the underground chamber that he knows where the boy sleeps. Yes, Harry told me. A pause that had something different in it. What did you say to him? I said what I always say, that we had better be ready. Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that Harry turned a page without reading it. All right, Dumbledore said at last. I will not argue for Privet Drive further, but I want my people to examine your wards. All of them, including whatever you're placing. Now, I want to see what you have, and I want to add what you're missing. I get to know the child I've been responsible for since 1981 is as protected as possible, Dumbledore said. What do you get? The benefit of 11 years of your contingency planning, Andromeda said, which I suspect is considerable. It is, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice Harry could not identify, not quite humor, but something adjacent to the kind of respect that shows up in a person's voice when they've stopped being surprised by someone. Shall we agree, then, that your people and my people will coordinate? You keep the arrangement's terms. I advise Harry. Doesn't need to know the details of the arrangement, Andromeda said. He'll know the house is safer. That's enough. Agreed. The summer settled into its ordinary shape, which was its own kind of extraordinary. Harry flew in the garden in the mornings. Not practice, just flying. The particular pleasure of being in the air without any competitive purpose. He had not realized during the school year how much he had missed this, the sensation of altitude and the specific quiet of being 50 feet above everything. He flew until Ted called him in for breakfast, which Ted did at 9 every morning with the reliable timing of a person who has organized their day around the knowledge that someone else's day needs organizing too. Ted was not a powerful wizard. This was something Harry had understood gradually, over years, not because anyone said it, but because it was there in the texture of how Ted moved through the magical world, carefully, without assumption, with the particular awareness of someone who had grown up knowing that magic could be used against him as easily as for him. He had survived the war, he told Harry that summer, through a combination of speed and luck and having married a woman who was considerably better at defensive magic than he was. He said this with the complete lack of resentment of someone who has made peace with an accurate assessment of himself. "You knew it was going to be bad?" Harry asked. "Everyone knew it was going to be bad," Ted said. The question was just how bad and for how long. He thought about it. The trick was not assuming it was over. People who assumed it was over went home and stopped paying attention, and that's when it caught them. He looked at Harry sideways. "I don't think you have that problem." "No," Harry said. "No," Ted agreed. "You're very much your mother's son in that regard, from what I understand." Harry looked at him. Ted had met Lily Potter exactly twice, and had been at James and Lily's wedding, and had then lost both of them in a single night in 1981, a loss that had been, Harry suspected, absorbed into the larger grief of the war and never quite processed separately. He thought about asking. He let it go. There were questions that needed more than a morning in the garden. Nymphadora came home twice that summer, for the weekend each time, and both times her hair changed color. In the doorway before she'd finished saying hello. Something involuntary at the specific relief of being home. She told Harry about Aurore training with the enthusiasm of someone who has found the exact right place for them and cannot stop noticing it. She also, in the quiet way, she had of circling back to things that mattered, sat with him on the back step one evening, and said, "You're all right, though. Actually all right, not just saying it." "Yes," Harry said. She bumped his shoulder with hers. "Because I told you I'd always come back, and I meant it, but I need you to do the same." "I'll do my best," Harry said. "That's all I'm asking." Her hair shifted briefly. The color she'd chosen for him when she was 11, and leaving for Hogwarts, the bright orange that had been a joke, a gift. Then it changed back. "Right," she said. "Tell me what you're planning to study before year 2. In August, Harry sat at the kitchen table with a piece of parchment and wrote out the list. He had been compiling it in his head all summer. The specific properties of basilisk venom and the creatures that produced it, which had appeared on a list Andromeda had sent him in his first term without explanation, and which now seemed worth understanding properly. The history of Tom Riddle, which was a gap, and one he suspected would matter. Andromeda came and read over his shoulder without announcing herself, which was a habit she'd had as long as he could remember. He heard her make the specific sound she made when she was reading something she considered incomplete. "You're missing occlumency," she said. Harry looked up at her. "I don't know anyone who teaches it." "Not yet," she said. "That's the point of putting it on a list." She picked up the quill that was lying beside the parchment and added it in her handwriting, beneath his, at the bottom of the column. "Occlumency. Find a teacher." Then he looked up at her, because the addition had a specific quality. Not a suggestion, but a directive. The kind of thing she put on a list when she had already decided it was necessary, and was simply waiting for the right time to say so. "He was in my head," Harry said. "When we touched, I could feel him trying to find something." "Yes," Andromeda said. "That's why. She set the quill down and went back to what she'd been doing, and the kitchen settled around them into the long light of an August evening. And Harry looked at the list and thought about the year ahead of him, and about the fact that Voldemort knew where he slept, and had no body and no agent and currently no way of acting on that knowledge. And thought about what Andromeda had said in November 1981 and had been living by ever since. Then we had better be ready. He picked up the quill. He added a second item below, Andromeda's. In his own handwriting, everything else she thinks of first. He heard her exhale behind him, not a laugh, but the shape of one. The voice in the walls began in October. Harry heard it for the first time while crossing the entrance hall, a sound beneath sound, the specific register of something very large moving through a confined space, and he stopped walking and stood very still. It was speaking. He had known since he was 9 that he was a Parselmouth. Andromeda had told him the way she told all difficult things, directly, without the softening that would require revision later. She had told him what Parseltongue was, what it looked like to someone who couldn't hear it, and that most of the wizarding world would find it alarming. She had told him because she thought he should know strange things about himself before he discovered them in public. So when the voice moved through the castle walls, and he recognized what it was, not English, not any human language, but the other kind, the one that lived in him underneath everything else, he did not alarm himself about what it meant. He stood in the entrance hall and listened until it was gone, and then he went upstairs and wrote to Andromeda. He described the sound as precisely as he could, the register, the rhythm of it, the direction it moved. He told her it was Parseltongue. He told her it was large. He told her the castle had pipes. Her response came 3 days later and was a numbered list annotated in her handwriting. Large serpentine, creature capable of traversing castle pipe systems. The list had 7 possibilities. He read through them with the patience she had trained into him for exactly this kind of research task. The first 2 he was able to rule out immediately. Number 3 was basilisk. He read the basilisk entry twice. He read the note she'd added in the margin. Gaze, kills, check, symptoms. The first petrification occurred the following week, which was not a coincidence. He was managing a crisis with better information than he'd had in year 1. This did not make the crisis smaller. It made it more legible, which was a different kind of difficult. He knew what was in the walls. He did not yet know where it was entering the castle or who was directing it. The diary appeared in his possession in November, in circumstances he never fully resolved. It was simply there, one afternoon, blank and leather-bound, in a place where he was fairly certain it had not been before. He picked it up and examined it with the attention Andromeda had trained him to bring to objects that appeared out of nowhere, which was the same attention she'd trained him to bring to anything that seemed to offer itself too conveniently. He dipped a quill in ink and wrote his name. The ink disappeared immediately. Something wrote back, "Hello, Harry Potter." Harry set the quill down and looked at what had just appeared in a journal with no ink in it. He had been taught, over 11 years, to distrust objects that communicated in the absence of anyone communicating through them. A book was not a person. A diary was not a person. If this object was writing to him, it was because something had been put into it that wanted things from him, and what it wanted was worth being careful about. He wrote, "What are you?" "A memory," it answered. "A record." A student named Tom Riddle preserved in these pages 50 years ago. "I want to help you." Harry looked at this for a long time. Then he took the diary to the library and read everything he could find about magical objects capable of communication. He came back with more specific questions the next day, and more the day after. The voice in the diary was patient and persuasive, and it had very clearly been designed to be both of those things, which made Harry more careful, not less. He did not give it what it was asking for, which he understood eventually was trust. It wanted him to trust it enough to let it show him things. It wanted the specific quality of openness that Riddle had probably found in everyone he'd ever spoken to before Harry Potter, who had been raised by someone who thought that objects which communicated unprompted were suspect until proven otherwise. Meanwhile, the petrifications continued. Someone at the school had the creature under direction. Harry was sure of this, because a basilisk moving randomly through a castle would have killed everyone it encountered, rather than selectively petrifying people in the corridors at intervals. Someone knew where it was. He was building a picture, and the picture required more pieces, and he was waiting for them to arrive. What he did not know was that another student, a girl, young, new to Hogwarts, had been carrying the diary before it came to him, that while he had been interrogating it from a careful distance, she had not been careful at all, and the memory inside the pages had found a better route when Harry proved difficult. He found this out in May when she disappeared. The message was on the corridor wall in large letters. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. Harry stood in front of it and understood what had happened. The memory had redirected, had found someone it could work with more easily, and it had taken a student with it into whatever was at the bottom of the pipes. He found the entrance in a second-floor bathroom, a sink with a small serpent on the tap, a drain that opened when he spoke to it in Parseltongue. He went in without stopping to consider whether going in was a good idea, because he had already decided, and stopping to reconsider only complicated decisions already made. He found her on the chamber floor. The diary was beside her, punctured through with something, already destroyed before he arrived, which was wrong in a way he filed for later. And in the center of the chamber stood a boy who was not quite a boy, a memory and a presence and something that had been feeding on a young girl's life all year and was nearly substantial enough to be real. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. The shape smiled. "You were a disappointment," it said. "You were supposed to be easier." "I know," Harry said. The basilisk came at the sound of Riddle's voice. Harry closed his eyes. He heard the sorting hat hit the stone beside him before he registered that Fawkes was there, the phoenix's wing beat, the warm flame smell of it landing. He reached into the hat by feel and found the sword's hilt. He kept his eyes closed. He moved by sound, the vast displacement of something enormous in a confined space, the direction of it, the way the air changed just before impact. He had been afraid of this since October. He went toward it anyway. He killed the basilisk with 3 strikes, and the last one cost him. The fang entered his forearm, and the venom moved immediately, cold and deliberate, tracking up through his arm and into his shoulder, and he had time to think that this was not a good development before Fawkes landed on him and wept. The warmth moved faster than the cold. He lay on the chamber floor and looked at the carved stone ceiling and waited to find out which one would win. The warmth won. He came home in June and told Andromeda in the kitchen with the same completeness with which he always told her things. The voice in the pipes, the list, basilisk at number 3. The diary, and what he'd understood it wanted. The girl on the chamber floor. Riddle's face, the sword, the fang, Fawkes. He told her all of it in order because she had raised him to report accurately and not to edit the significant parts into something easier. She listened with her hands folded and her expression even. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The diary," she said, A memory of riddle preserved in an object. Yes. Different in quality from the first. He recognized the quality. It was the silence she had before she named something she had been carrying for some time. "A Horcrux," she said. He had heard the word before, at the edges of adult conversation, and had not known what it meant. "What's a Horcrux?" She looked at him for a moment, then she explained. She had encountered the concept during the war, at the margins of what people had managed to piece together, about how Voldemort had survived as long as he had, about what category of dark magic could make a person genuinely difficult to kill. A Horcrux was an object in which a fragment of a person's soul had been placed, split from the whole through the commission of a specific irreversible act. It preserved that fragment outside the body. It was the worst kind of dark magic that existed, and it was also, she said, likely why Voldemort had survived as a wraith rather than dying properly when the killing curse rebounded on him in 1981. He could not be gone entirely while that piece survived. How many? Harry said. "I don't know," she said. "I don't think anyone does." He absorbed this. The diary was one. Yes. Her voice had the quality of something being stated very carefully, one word at a time. Which means there are fewer than there were. Dumbledore came in August. He arrived at the front door with the specific timing of a man who had recently received information and had decided what to do about it. Andromeda let him in. Harry stayed at the kitchen table and heard most of it through the sitting room wall. "She's told you," Dumbledore said. "He is 12 years old." Andromeda said, "He was poisoned in the Chamber of Secrets in June. He destroyed a Horcrux using a basilisk fang while running on borrowed time. I think he is old enough to know what a Horcrux is. The order in which information is given matters." Dumbledore's voice had the quiet of a man who has decided not to lose his composure and wants that to be understood as a choice. There is context required. The context is that Voldemort made at least one Horcrux, and possibly more, and Harry is the person designated by prophecy to face him. Andromeda paused. "I have been managing what I tell him for 12 years. I have managed it very carefully. I am not going to be given guidance about the order in which I tell him his own war. There are things that become different when they are known before their time. There are things that become different when they are not known," Andromeda said. He walked into the Chamber of Secrets without knowing what the diary was. He would have liked to know. The pause had a quality Harry recognized as her waiting for Dumbledore to say something he didn't want to say. "What do you know about Horcruxes that I don't, beyond their existence?" "I thought so," Andromeda said. The conversation reached the point where nothing further could be said without making things worse, and both of them seemed to arrive at this simultaneously. Harry heard Dumbledore's footsteps move toward the door. "She is extremely good at this," Dumbledore said, and Harry understood it was addressed to Andromeda about herself. The specific kind of acknowledgement given when a person has bested you, and you are both aware of it. "I've had 12 years of practice," Andromeda said. The door opened and then closed. Harry sat in the August light and thought about the word Horcrux and about Riddle's face in the chamber when Harry had told him he was a disappointment, and about what the silence in the sitting room had meant. Dumbledore knew something he wasn't saying that was not new. The new thing was that Andromeda had named it aloud, and Dumbledore had not denied it. He thought about year 3, which was coming, and about the list on his desk upstairs that had occlumency written on it in 2 different hands, and he thought about what else needed to be added. There was more than the Horcruxes. He could feel the edges of it. He would find out what it was eventually. That was the thing about information Dumbledore managed carefully. It had a way of arriving, whether or not anyone planned for it. He would be ready when it did. The headline was in the Prophet on the 22nd of July. Andromeda read it at the kitchen table with the same stillness she used for emergencies. Not the stillness of someone managing fear, but of someone converting it very quickly into something she could use. Sirius Black. Escapes. She read it through twice and then set the paper down and thought about all the things the headline did not say. Sirius had been in Azkaban for 12 years for murdering Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles, and for betraying the Potters to Voldemort. She had believed this entirely for 12 years. The way you believed things that were supported by everything and contradicted by nothing. What she thought now, reading the headline, was not about belief or guilt. She thought, Sirius knows Harry exists. He named Harry his godson, and then by every account helped murder the people that godson belonged to. And he is out, Dementor weakened but free, and no one knows where he is. She wrote to Dumbledore within the hour. His reply came by return owl. Harry is safe at Hogwarts. I will ensure it. She wrote back. That is not the reassurance you think it is. She sent Harry back to Hogwarts on the 1st of September with an additional letter in his trunk, sealed, that explained what she knew and what she didn't, and that ended with the words she had used before, we had better be ready. The Dementors were on the Hogwarts Express. Harry had read about Dementors in Andromeda's books and in the additional texts he'd gathered after Year 2, when he'd started assembling a more complete library of dark creatures. He knew what they were, cloaked things 10 feet tall, that moved as though they had no bones and fed on happiness the way fire fed on air, and whose presence made the world cold and colorless. He had thought he understood them. The Dementor opened the compartment door, and the world went cold and dark and wrong. And what he understood immediately was that knowing about a thing was categorically different from having a thing happen to you. He heard the cold rush of a memory he hadn't known he carried. A woman's voice, high and frightened, saying, "No, not Harry, please, not Harry." He had heard Andromeda's voice in the dark all his life. This voice was his mother's. Then the dark took him. He came back to himself on the floor of the compartment. Someone was offering him chocolate. He took it because his hands needed something to do, while his mind did the other thing, which was file what had just happened and understand it and decide what he was going to do about it. The Dada teacher knelt at his level and waited for him to process. He had seen this man every year of his life, since he was 9 months old, and he had spent a decade absorbing the fact that Remus Lupin existed without knowing very much about why, and here was Lupin, at eye level in a train compartment, looking at Harry with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular moment and has just watched it arrive. "Eat the chocolate," Lupin said. "Then tell me how you feel." Harry ate the chocolate and told him how he felt, which was accurate and organized, which was not the answer Lupin appeared to have expected from a 13-year-old who had just passed out, but which seemed to confirm something he was already thinking. In the Data classroom, Lupin was the best teacher Harry had encountered at Hogwarts. This was a considered assessment, not an enthusiastic one. He had been learning Dada theory from books and Andromeda's guidance since he was 7, and most of what the subject had given him so far was the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical technique. Lupin taught the practical with a cheerful directness that assumed you were capable of learning it if you tried, which was the assumption Harry found most conducive to actually trying. He had a boggart on the first day, and a Grindylow by the 3rd week, and a specific gift for explaining the logic underneath a spell in a way that made the mechanics suddenly visible. He also, Harry noticed, watched Harry from the corner of his eye in the specific way of a person who has additional context and is trying not to let it show. After the third class, Lupin asked Harry to stay. "I knew your father," Lupin said when the other students had gone. He said it the way Harry had learned to say difficult things from Andromeda, directly, without softening. "James, we were at Hogwarts together. Friends from our first year." Harry looked at him. "I know. I thought you might." Lupin sat on the edge of his desk. Not a teacher's posture, the posture of someone settling in for a conversation that might take time. "I also thought you might have questions." "Several," Harry said. "I don't know which one to start with. Try the one that's been waiting the longest." Harry considered this. The question that had been waiting the longest was not about the war or about the night his parents died or about any of the things he'd been managing since he was 9. It was simpler and older than any of those. Harry said before everything, just, who was he? Lupin was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who didn't have an answer, but of someone choosing carefully among many. "He was very sure of himself," Lupin said at last. "Not in a cruel way, or not usually. He thought he was good at most things, and he was right about most things, and he never quite worked out that being right about the thing and being gracious about being right were two different skills. He spent 3 years asking Lily Evans to go to a dance with him, and genuinely couldn't understand why she kept saying no, because he thought he was quite a catch, and he was right about that too. But somehow that didn't help." A pause. "He also once transfigured Flitwick's desk into a hedgehog so complete that it required the better part of an afternoon to reverse. And he spent the detention explaining to Flitwick with complete sincerity that the transfiguration had been technically brilliant, which was true." Harry sat with this. It was a specific kind of information, the kind that made a person into a person rather than a story. "He would have been proud of you," Lupin said quietly. "I want to be clear that I'm not saying that because it's the expected thing to say. I'm saying it because I watched him practice Quidditch at 5 in the morning because he wanted to be better than he already was, and I watched him learn something he was bad at until he wasn't bad at it anymore, and you are recognizably his, in the way that matters." The question that had been waiting underneath that one, the question about why Lupin had visited every year and brought books and sat in the sitting room with the particular posture of someone who found small spaces difficult, but had never done more than that, Harry did not ask. He understood, approximately, that the answer was complicated and involved his mother's death and the limits of what Lupin could carry, and that some questions needed more than a Dada classroom in September. He thanked Lupin and went to dinner and thought about hedgehogs. The Dementors affected him worse than they should have, and he knew this. He had the theoretical framework, and he had the previous encounter on the train, and he knew the Patronus charm was the counter, and none of that was helping with the fact that every time a Dementor came near him, the cold descended and the voice started. He heard his mother first. Always his mother first, the high frightened sound of her in the last moments, not the photographs, not the mirror's version, but the raw and unreconstructed original of a memory he hadn't known he'd kept at 15 months old. And underneath it, as the cold deepened, something else, Andromeda's voice, coming from below the panic, steady and even, and saying the thing it had always said in the dark, "I know." That's the right response. He understood that this was why he didn't collapse entirely, that the Andromeda voice underneath his mother's voice was the thing that gave him something to hold, something he could press his hands against in the cold, until his hands stopped shaking. He asked Lupin to teach him the Patronus. Lupin taught him the way he taught everything, with the practical logic made visible, with the assumption that Harry would manage it if he tried, with a specific patience, of a person who has seen someone encounter something genuinely difficult and has decided the correct response is to stay. The happy memory was harder than Harry expected, not because he didn't have happy memories, but because the Dementor had a way of reaching past the surface ones, past the warmth of a Tuesday at the kitchen table and finding the cold underneath them. He found a memory that worked eventually. He did not tell Lupin what it was. The Patronus that burst from his wand was silver and enormous and entirely, unmistakably, a stag. Harry looked at it. He had not known it would be. Lupin looked at it too. He was quiet for a long moment with the expression of a man who has just had something confirmed that he had been both hoping for and dreading since September. "Your father's animagus form was a stag," Lupin said. "I didn't know that," Harry said. "No." Lupin looked at him, the particular look of a man reassessing the distance between something and something else, calculating what it meant. "No, I suppose you wouldn't have." Harry watched the stag pace the room and dissolve. He thought about his father at 5 in the morning on a Quidditch pitch, practicing until he was better than he already was. He thought about James Potter's face in the mirror of Erezd, alive and warm and looking at him, and about the stag moving through a dark Dada classroom, and the expression on Lupin's face, which was too many things at once to name. The Shrieking Shack appeared in April when he least expected it to and changed everything. The sequence of events that brought Harry to the tunnel under the Whomping Willow was one of those chains where each link seemed reasonable and the whole looked, in retrospect, inevitable. Someone dragged through a gap in the roots. Someone else, following the long dark of the tunnel, and then a room at the end of it, and a man Harry recognized from 12 years of newspaper photographs. Thin, Dementor-hollowed, with dark hair hanging lank, and grey eyes that moved to Harry's face and stayed there. "No." "You look like James," Sirius Black said. "I've been told," Harry said. Sirius was not what Harry had spent 12 years imagining. He had imagined something that fitted the headline. Dangerous, certain, the specific quality of person who had looked at his best friend's family and chosen Voldemort instead. What he was, in the Shrieking Shack, was exhausted and burning with the contained energy of someone who has been waiting 12 years for a particular moment. He looked at Harry the way the mirror of Erezd had shown Lily looking at Harry, like someone finding something they had been afraid was gone. Lupin arrived and was not surprised by Sirius, which was the first surprise. What followed came apart and reassembled itself very quickly. Lupin and Sirius speaking around each other in the shorthand of people who had known each other for 20 years. A rat. Not a rat. A man hiding, who had been hiding for 12 years in the specific way of someone with a great deal to hide. A name. Peter Pettigrew. Harry listened and assembled and understood what he was hearing before anyone had finished saying it. The real secret keeper. The real betrayer. The person who had faked his own death and framed Sirius for it, and hidden as an animal in a Muggle family for 12 years, while the wrong man sat in Azkaban. Sirius, who had been in Azkaban for 12 years for something he did not do. Sirius, who had been named Harry's godfather by James and Lily, and who had been unable to claim him on the night of the 1st of November, 1981, because he was already being arrested for the murders he hadn't committed. Sirius, because of whose imprisonment Andromeda had claimed Harry instead. Harry stood in the Shrieking Shack and let all of this arrive at its full size, and the size of it was considerable. The premise had been wrong. The foundational story, the one that had preceded everything, the one Andromeda had told him at the kitchen table, at 8 years old, with her hands folded and her voice even, had been built on a lie that Pettigrew had constructed, including every newspaper and every Wizengamot member, and every person in the wizarding world who had known the name Sirius Black. Andromeda had claimed him because Sirius could not. And Sirius could not because someone had put him in Azkaban for something he did not do. He thought about the kitchen table. He thought about her hands folded. He thought about, "I claimed you because you were there and no one else would." He thought about whether that sentence changed now, and what it changed into. Pettigrew escaped. In the chaos that followed Lupin's transformation, the confusion, the dark, the man who had been a rat, slipped out through a gap and was gone before anyone could close it. Sirius got away too on a winged animal that appeared from above like something out of a story, and Harry watched both of them disappear in different directions, and stood in the grass outside the Whomping Willow and understood that the evidence had escaped along with the man they couldn't try. Sirius was free but not cleared. Pettigrew was free and invisible. The world would go on believing Sirius Black was a mass murderer because the proof to the contrary had just transformed back into a rat and run into the dark. Harry stood in the grass with the castle lights in the distance and the night coming down around him and thought about Andromeda reading the headline in July. That is not the reassurance you think it is. She had believed Sirius guilty for 12 years and built her entire claim on that belief. And the belief was wrong, and the claim was still the only reason Harry had grown up in a house where someone fought for him. He didn't know yet what to do with that. He knew he was going to have to tell her. He thought about the list on his desk at home with occlumency written in 2 different hands, and about her voice underneath his mother's voice when the Dementors came, and about a stag pacing a dark room, and about everything he did not yet know about the 12 years that had made his life what it was. He went back to the castle and waited for morning. He wrote the letter that night, sitting alone in the hospital wing where Madame Pomfrey had put him while the rest of the castle tried to work out what had happened. The letter was short. He had been raised by a woman who did not believe in saying more than was necessary when less would do, and less was sufficient here. Sirius didn't do it. I watched it happen. Pettigrew is alive. He folded it and sent it, and waited. 3 days later, her reply came in the early morning, delivered to the hospital wing window by an owl that looked like it had traveled through the night. He read it before he was fully awake. 3 sentences. He read them 3 times. I know. I believe you. I am finding out what can be done. He lay back in the hospital bed and held the letter and thought about all 3 sentences separately. She already knew or had held the possibility open, had kept some part of herself from closing it entirely. She believed him without waiting for confirmation from any other source, which was the thing she had always done. Taken his word as fact rather than as a report requiring triangulation. And she was already moving, which was the thing she had always done too. He thought about the premise of what she had done in 1981. The legal claim had been built on the Black family structure. Sirius was Harry's, named Godfather. Sirius was imprisoned. Andromeda was the next available Black by blood. The only one who was both free and willing. The claim followed from this sequence, like a logical conclusion. What it had not followed from was Sirius's guilt. She had not claimed Harry because Sirius was a murderer who had forfeited his role. She had claimed Harry because Harry was there and no one else would. That had always been the whole of it. He had known this since he was 8 years old at a kitchen table. The revelation that the story was wrong did not change what she had done. It changed what the story meant, and it changed certain things about the year ahead of him, and it changed the situation of a man who had been sitting in Azkaban for 12 years for something he hadn't done, but it did not change what she had done or why. He thought about this for a long time. Then he got up and went to breakfast. Lupin's werewolf status was exposed in the days that followed. the wrong people found out in the wrong way, the situation at the school became untenable, and Lupin resigned before the end of term. Harry heard about it from McGonagall, who told him, with the expression of someone who finds a situation regrettable and wants this to be clearly understood. He asked if he could speak to Lupin before he left. He found Lupin in his office, already half-packed, the travelling cases arranged with the specific efficiency of someone who has moved before and knows how to do it quickly. Lupin looked up when Harry came in and looked back down at what he was boxing. "I thought you might—" "Come," Lupin said. "You knew all year," Harry said, "about Sirius." "Yes." A pause. "I should have gone to Dumbledore in September when I arrived and found the situation as it was. I didn't, because I had believed for 12 years that Sirius had betrayed your parents, and I didn't know what I would do if I was in the same room with him. I was wrong about him. I was wrong for 12 years. He set down what he was holding and looked at Harry. "I should also tell you why I never came forward. In 1981, why I didn't try to claim you." Harry leaned against the doorframe and waited. "2 reasons," Lupin said. "The first is legal and would have been conclusive. Regardless, the Ministry's classification of my condition would have barred me from guardianship of a child under any circumstances. This is not something I could have appealed or worked around. It is simply what the law was." He was quiet for a moment. "The second reason is the one I'm less proud of. I believed Sirius had betrayed James and Lily, and I decided that I had already failed them, and that the least I could do was not further burden their child with my failure. It seemed like it would be kinder to stay at the edges to visit, to bring books." Another pause. "I was wrong about that too. Andromeda didn't think like that," Harry said. Lupin looked at him. His face did the complicated thing it had done in the DADATA classroom when the stag Patronus had paced across the room, too many things at once to name, arranged around a center that was something like recognition. "No," Lupin said quietly. "She never did think like the rest of us." Harry came home in the second week of July, earlier than the end of term. McGonagall had made arrangements, which he suspected involved an owl to Andromeda, and Andromeda deciding that arrangements should be made. He came through the front door, and the house was exactly what it had always been: warm, specific, full of the particular smell of a household that had been expecting him. Andromeda was in the kitchen. He set down his trunk and sat at the kitchen table, and she sat across from him, and they looked at each other across the surface, where she had told him about Voldemort and the prophecy, and the bond of blood and Sirius Black, and all the rest of it, one true sentence at a time, since he was small enough to need them given that way. "If you had known Sirius was innocent," Harry said, "if you had known he would be free someday, would you still have claimed me?" Andromeda looked at him steadily. She did not answer immediately. She was, he understood, actually considering the question rather than reaching for the answer that was easier to give or to receive. This was one of the things about her that had always been true. She did not give the comfortable answer when the true one was available. "I claimed you," she said at last, "because you were there. Because you needed someone, and I was the only Black who could and would. Sirius being innocent or guilty doesn't change that. You needed someone that night. But Sirius is alive," Harry said. "He's free. He's my godfather." "Yes," Andromeda said. "So what does that make you?" The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the wall marked the time. Outside the window there was summer. Ordinary summer. The specific light of a July afternoon that didn't know anything about dementors or men wrongly imprisoned or the particular cost of a decision made in the middle of a November night 13 years ago. Andromeda said, "What do you want it to make me?" he told her. He said it once, a single word, and Andromeda looked at him the way you looked at something you had been carrying for a very long time and had just been allowed to set down, not the relief of a burden lifted, but the specific relief of having the thing you carried finally recognized for what it was. She reached across the table and put a hand over his, which was not something she often did, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the summer light moved through the kitchen, and the clock kept time. Nymphadora arrived the following weekend for 2 days, which was the gap Auror training allowed. She came through the front door with her traveling cloak still on, and her hair a color Harry had never seen her try before. A deep, settled blue, the color of something that had found its form after a long time deciding. She looked at Harry and at the kitchen and at Andromeda with the reading of a person who understood households and their states. And then she dropped her bag and said, "Right, someone put the kettle on." Ted put the kettle on. The 4 of them spent the weekend in the ordinary way, meals at the kitchen table. Nymphadora telling Auror, training stories that were heroic in ways she never intended and funny in ways she always did. Ted asking Harry about school with the genuine interest of a man for whom the wizarding world remained worth understanding after 2 decades in it. In the afternoons, Harry sat at the kitchen table with his summer homework. He was doing it partly because it needed doing, and partly because sitting at this table, in this kitchen, with the house arranged around him the way it had always been, that was one of the things he'd found in 3 years at Hogwarts, that he had missed most. Andromeda read. He watched her occasionally, from the corner of his eye, the specific quality of her stillness when she was absorbed, the way she turned pages with the focused economy of someone who brought her whole attention to a thing. She was 41 years old, and she had spent 13 years building something out of a choice she'd made in the middle of the night in November 1981. And the thing she had built was this: a household where a person who had been assigned an enormous destiny had grown up knowing what he was and what he was worth. The prophecy had not been fulfilled. Voldemort was still a wraith, still out there somewhere, still working toward the body that would make him dangerous again in ways that would require more than a stag patronus and a basilisk sword. The bond of blood had never been placed. The safe house had never been sealed. The gap that Dumbledore had named in November 1981 was still there, had never been closed, had been compensated for and built around and carefully managed, but not fixed, could not be fixed, now, by any means available to anyone who is also unwilling to give up this specific child to a household. And Harry Potter was 13 years old and sitting at the kitchen table of a house that was not sealed and not secret and not the thing Dumbledore had planned, doing his summer homework while the woman who had claimed him read in the chair by the window and Nymphadora's new blue hair caught the light. And Ted moved in the kitchen with the unhurried competence of someone who has spent 20 years learning how to make a particular household work. The next war had not yet begun. It was not what Dumbledore had planned. It was what Andromeda had chosen on an ordinary night in November, for no reason,